The royal fairy tale you've been force-fed since childhood is a meticulously manufactured lie. They sold you a glittering 73-year romance, a perfect partnership between a handsome naval officer and a young queen. But the true story? The real history locked away in the palace vaults? It is a brutal, systematic stripping of a man's identity. Inside a single month, Prince Philip was forced to surrender his country, his church, his titles, and his own surname. And for what? To spend the next decade discovering exactly how little that massive blood sacrifice bought him. There is one tiny, overlooked object he wore every single day for 77 years, a secret nobody bothered to look at properly. Before we expose the darkest, most humiliating corners of this royal marriage, hit that subscribe button to Crown Watch right now. We tear down the palace walls to bring you the raw truth, and your support is our battering ram. Do it right now, because this is going to get heavy. Let's shatter the biggest myth right out of the gate. You've been told Philip and Elizabeth never lived together at Buckingham Palace. False. They moved into that cold, sprawling museum in 1952. But the reality is vicious. Philip fought that move with every ounce of his being. He called it an office block overrun by courtiers. He fought, he lost, and he was dragged in anyway. He didn't escape until 2017 at the age of 96. Imagine that psychological prison. A man battles a house at 30, and the second he is legally freed from public duty at 96, he packs his bags and runs. That is not a retirement. That is a prisoner finally finishing his sentence. To understand his absolute isolation, you have to look at his left hand. December 1944. Philip's father dies completely broke in a Monaco hotel room. Philip is 23, fighting in the brutal theaters of the war. What does he inherit? A trunk of old clothes, a wooden shaving brush, and a signet ring. That is it. The entire material legacy of a prince handed to a son who was practically homeless. He slid that ring onto his pinky finger and never took it off. Through the massive coronation, global state banquets, and a million endless handshakes, he wore it until the crest was rubbed completely flat. It was the only thing he owned that wasn't handed to him by his wife's household. He walked into this marriage carrying ghosts that the royal family despised. At 16, his sister Cecile, heavily pregnant, died in a horrific plane crash. Philip walked behind her coffin in Germany, surrounded by men in Nazi uniforms. He didn't choose his family's sins. He fought for Britain. But when he asked to marry Elizabeth, those haunting photographs were weaponized to humiliate him in the halls of power. He had nothing. The royals demanded a steep price for her hand. He renounced absolutely everything that made him who he was, stepping into Buckingham Palace as a man carrying a dead man's ring and a surname that was completely invented for public relations. They took his past, and they were about to brutally execute his future. The absolute disrespect he endured behind those closed doors is completely staggering. He was a war hero treated like an absolute burden, an outsider who had to be aggressively managed by a suffocating staff that viewed him as entirely disposable. They smiled in his face while methodically dismantling his entire manhood. The ultimate betrayal didn't happen behind closed doors. It was stamped into the permanent legal record. On April 9, 1952, Elizabeth, having been queen for barely 8 weeks, signed a ruthless declaration. With a single devastating stroke of a pen, she stripped her husband's name from his own children. Windsor forever, Mountbatten erased. He wasn't even consulted. The British government and his wife's aging grandmother conspired behind his back, locking him completely out of the room. A dispute about a man's surname, something negotiated in kitchens by regular couples, was escalated to the Prime Minister. Philip was legally gagged. His reaction was visceral and heartbreaking. "I am nothing but a bloody amoeba. I am the only man in the country not allowed to give his name to his own children." It wasn't a tantrum. It was the cold, agonizing truth. Every working-class man in Britain, every dock worker and prisoner, had a fundamental right that was legally denied to him. The damage wasn't done by affairs or screaming matches. It was done in total, deafening silence, by cold paperwork. 69 years of public smiles, built over a foundation of absolute humiliation. Every time his children signed their names, that document was a knife twisting in his back. If you think the betrayal ended with his name, you have absolutely no idea how deep the cruelty runs in this family. On June 2, 1953, 27 million people watched the massive coronation broadcast. What they witnessed was the televised, orchestrated humiliation of a proud man. Philip got no crown. He got no throne. Instead, he was forced to perform the most degrading medieval oath in the monarchy's history. He took off his coronet, knelt on the floor in front of his wife, and surrendered his body, his life, and his earthly reputation to her. He swore to be her liege man of life and limb. He stood up, kissed her cheek, and had to walk backwards down the massive steps like a terrified servant. His face was a frozen mask of stone. The global public thought it was a beautiful, romantic gesture. In reality, it was an alpha male being publicly broken and aggressively put in his place by the very institution he sacrificed everything to join. The disrespect was absolutely relentless. For 10 excruciating years after the wedding, he wasn't even made a prince of the United Kingdom. His wife's mother and grandmother actively blocked the title. They despised his German roots and whispered vicious insults behind his back. At their lavish dinners, he was the unspoken joke, the unwanted, tolerated guest in a building his wife inherited. He swallowed that toxic poison every single day. The courtiers treated him as a temporary nuisance, a man whose only purpose was to walk exactly 2 steps behind his wife and keep his mouth permanently shut. His naval career, the one thing he earned on his own merit, was violently taken from him, leaving him with an endless, suffocating void. He spent his entire existence paying for a ticket into a world that never truly wanted him. The royal machine finally cracked under the pressure, but they never truly surrendered. In 1957, Philip vanished on a royal yacht for 4 agonizing months. The global media exploded. Vicious headlines screamed about a palace rift, a shattered marriage, and a royal family in total crisis. For the first time in a century, the notoriously silent Buckingham Palace absolutely panicked and issued a desperate written denial. They broke their own golden, untouchable rule just to protect the fragile illusion. They were terrified because the public was finally seeing the deep fractures. They saw the undeniable shape of a man desperate to be anywhere else, but trapped inside that palace. It took 8 years of silent, brutal warfare for Elizabeth to throw him a pathetic legal scrap. In 1960, she issued a reluctant order allowing their non-royal descendants to use the compounded name Mountbatten Windsor. But Charles and Anne? The 2 kids who were alive during the original 1952 betrayal? They kept Windsor. He fought a decades-long, grueling war and didn't even win his own children back. The establishment made sure he knew his ultimate place. The only true victory he ever tasted took 26 excruciating years. November 1973, Princess Anne marries. With 500 million people watching, she aggressively defies the crown and signs the legal register, Anne Mountbatten Windsor. Philip stood exactly 6 feet away, watching his defiant daughter do what the British government had strictly banned him from doing. She etched his mother's tragic bloodline into a permanent legal document. It was a massive, silent middle finger to the courtiers who tried to erase him. But the horror story didn't end with Philip. 30 years later, the exact same royal machine took a vulnerable 19-year-old named Diana Spencer. They locked her in the identical psychological prison. They aggressively dictated where she could walk, what she could wear, and exactly when she had to shut up. They destroyed her with the exact same cold-blooded, terrifying politeness used to dismantle Philip. He was the only person in that sprawling, freezing palace who truly understood Diana's living hell, because he was the original, ultimate victim of their systemic erasure. This is the vicious reality of the crown. It demands your absolute, total sacrifice and gives absolutely nothing back. It violently strips you of your core identity, takes your name, steals your career, and leaves you kneeling backwards on global television with nothing but a dead man's weathered ring on your pinky finger. If you want the raw, unfiltered truth that the palace is desperate to hide, hit that subscribe button to Crown Watch right now. We have the brutal receipts. We are exposing every single lie, and we are just getting started. Do not miss what we drop next. The monarchy survives by burying its darkest secrets, but we are digging them all up. Smash subscribe, leave a comment, and join the rebellion against the royal narrative.